The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeart Radio, Xena Radio, and of course, Simul Radio and Simul TV. If you'd like to send me an email, it's very simple, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Larry Holcombe. And a little bit about Larry. His introduction to the world of ufology came in the late 1950s after reading Major Donald Keyhoe's Flying Saucers Are Real and Flying Saucers from Outer Space that were found in his high school library. These books started a 50-plus year study and avocation into mainstream research of the most important story in history of mankind. Joining me now is Larry Holcombe. And Larry, welcome to the X Zone.
Well, delighted to be here, Rob. I hope you can hear me all right.
It sounds like you're right next door to me in the next studio, my friend.
Wonderful.
Larry, tell me more about your interest in UFOs.
Well, as you stated, my interest started in 1960 after reading a couple of Donald Keyhoe's books, Flying Saucers from Outer Space and Flying Saucers Are Real, I believe. I've got those titles correct. And his passion for the subject just drew me into it. There were other books written by people in that same time frame. George Adamski is one that I consider to be a kook. Although Adamski has gained some degree of respectability in later years, but I still hold him in the fringe area of ufology, or flying saucers, as I like to call them.
Let me ask you this then, Larry. Why do you give credibility to Keyhoe and not Adamski?
Well, Keyhoe was a respected Marine Corps aviator. He was a major, he retired a major. That's not any great rank, but in those days, between the world wars, there were promotions were slight. And Keyhoe had a great deal of friends within the Pentagon that respected him, and he respected them highly. And Keyhoe was originally a skeptic of this flying saucer issue, and only got into it because Ken W. Purdy, the editor of True Magazine, brought him to New York and told him he wanted him to do research on flying saucers and write an article on it. And Keyhoe wanted nothing to do with it. He didn't like it, but Purdy knew that he had a great deal of inside friends and information within the Pentagon, and he convinced him to do it. And within less than a year, Keyhoe turned from a true skeptic, to a true believer. And finally, a believer that he was dealing with a subject that involved extraterrestrial craft.
Well, didn't Adamski claim to have personal contact with the Venusians?
Yes, I think I can't remember his books all that well. It's been a long time ago.
Sure.
But I think that he at one time claimed that he even was taken on a flight to Venus. I may be wrong about that, but he certainly claimed to have contact with Venusians, yes.
Tell me what you call Doug Locke story.
The Doug Locke story, when I first became interested in this subject, when I was a high school junior, I had met this fellow, Doug Locke, and it's a long story, but I'll keep it as brief as I can.
Okay.
He was a young man, 15 years my senior. Mm-hmm. He was in his early 30s, and he opened up a new Sunoco service station in the little village of Sandston, Virginia, that I lived in, which is a suburb of Richmond, Virginia, right at now Richmond International Airport. And through conversations with him, we became pretty good friends, and he told me that he had been in the Air Force. He was stationed at Biggs Air Force Base, and he had been a judo instructor. How that happened, it's a long story, but it involved Curtis LeMay deciding that he wanted a judo program for pilots to be taught judo, and he wanted 24 judo instructors, and he turned it over to his subordinate, General Thomas Power. Doug was selected to be one of the 24 people to be sent to the Kodokan Institute in Japan to be taught by a world famous judo instructor, Japanese judo instructor. He came back, and I had read these books, but Doug was really an old country boy from Southside, Virginia. Grew up on a tobacco farm in Southside, Virginia. Mm-hmm. Became an electrician after high school, then went into the Air Force. And I had this interest in UFOs, or flying saucers, as I like to call them. But I was afraid to bring it up to Doug, because I thought he'd say, "Oh, you silly kid, you believe in that junk?" Well, I did. I finally steeled myself and brought it up to him, and I just was ready to be lambasted. And he looked at me and he said, "Larry, it's all true." Now, Rob, keep in mind, and this is important for you folks out there listening, keep in mind, this was 1960, not 1980 or 81 when Roswell's story broke, but 1960. And he told me that he trained pilots from Roswell. He trained one bomber pilot that told him of flying crash saucer debris from Roswell to Wright Field, mm-hmm. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Right.
Now, Doug didn't have any way. He was just an airman teaching judo, and he was telling me stories these pilots had told him. Obviously, the pilots were under some level of security or clearance back then. I don't know what it might have been back then, but of some level. But they felt close enough to their judo instructor to tell him these stories off the record. Doug told me, and there were many pilots that chased these saucers that told him they scared the living hell out of them, that these things did things that they couldn't believe. And this was all over New Mexico, which, of course, we were testing atomic bombs. We were firing B-2 rockets. So what you have is a man in 1960 that mm-hmm. told me a story that absolutely overlaps the story that broke through Stanton Friedman and several others, Don Schmidt, in 1980. The books that were written in 1980. And so the story broke then. I knew about it 20 years before then. I'd never heard of Roswell. Didn't know what Roswell was. Didn't know where it was. I mean, I knew it was in New Mexico, but I'd never heard of it before. So I knew in 1960 a story that was the same story that broke, that this airman couldn't have known the story that was going to break in 1980. So there's only one fly in the ointment. Either it is absolutely true, and this is a major backup to the Roswell story, or I personally have made it up myself, and I assure you I didn't.
Actually, there is one more possibility, and we'll talk about that when we come back from this commercial break. Exonation, my guest this hour is Larry Holcombe. His website is www.larryholcombe.com. And this is the X Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And we're coming to you in our 29th year from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Larry Holcombe is my guest to this hour, Exonation, www.larryholcombe.com. And you know, Larry, there was, in my opinion, one more explanation. Here you've got a bunch of aircraft pilots who may have witnessed something. They didn't know what they had witnessed or been part of, going back to 1947. Pilots get together, pilots exchange stories. I'm not saying that the pilot did not tell you the story and you had your first insight into the Roswell incident going back to 1947 because Stanton Friedman and the other boys hadn't written their books yet. So I think that third possibility also plays a major part in the probable story that you gave us before.
What's that?
Well, that I just said it. You know, I'll repeat myself. You've got a pilot who may have been in Roswell, New Mexico, or he may have heard a story about something that may have happened in Roswell, New Mexico, and he relayed it to you. It doesn't mean that it really did happen. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but there is more than two possibilities as to the existence of the story.
Well, you've got pilots from Roswell, a number of pilots from Roswell. I've often wondered if the bomber pilot that told him about flying crash debris to right field was Pappy Henderson. But he had fighter pilots that chased these things. And so, as he told me, as best I can recall, Rob, and you know, this is a long time ago.
Sure.
In fact, I had forgotten where I knew about Roswell. I went back and reread the Keyhoe's books to see if he talked about Roswell. Nobody talked about Roswell back then. It wasn't heard of. Nobody knew anything about Roswell until the story broke in 1980. But here this man is telling me that he had a number of pilots that told him not about one instance, but about a number of instances, and primarily pilots that flew out of Roswell. That was their home base. And other bases close by, including Biggs Air Force Base there in El Paso, Fort Bliss, that told him the same story, and they apparently were not related. So I think that I think it's a pretty solid piece of circumstantial evidence.
But once again, it's circumstantial because there is no evidence to support any claim whatsoever that a UFO really did crash in Roswell. Something happened. We'll all agree to that. But whether or not it was, these little 3 aliens and a crashed UFO on the Brazil farm, that has still yet to be,
Well,
confirmed.
I certainly I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I've studied it long enough and spent enough time with it that I believe that the mountain of circumstantial evidence indicates to me that that's the story. There have been too many lies that have been told. The Air Force has told too many lies.
The witnesses have told lies. The apparent witnesses have told lies. Not everything that goes wrong in the world is the government's fault. I think the people have to bear some of the burden themselves.
Yes, but when you have close to 200 witnesses now, I think that says a great deal about the accuracy of this circumstantial evidence. And I don't buy into all of the stories. Believe me, not anyway.
Sure.
But I think that there are some very, very legitimate people. And I know that there's also been some researchers in Roswell that have shaded the truth and done things that I'm not very happy with.
Well, it just isn't the
I'm not going to mention names. It certainly wasn't Stanton Friedman. I've known Stan for a long time, and he's the straightest arrow.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, but when it comes to the Roswell case, everybody gleams over the part that Jesse Marcel is the biggest case against Roswell. His credibility as a base intelligence officer went out the window, and anything that has to do with the Roswell case from the time Jesse Marcel picked up the stuff at Mark Brazel's house and on the way back to the base, what does he do? Oh, he decides to go home and let his wife and son play with evidence. I was a police officer for a number of years, and one thing I would never do is bring evidence home to let my kids play with it. Because as soon as you do that, the chain of evidence custody is shot. That case is dead. And yet, nobody talks about how Jesse Marcel screwed up.
Well, that's an interesting point. But then, why did Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, let Walter Hart, the public information officer, issue a statement to the press?
Maybe
and
it was
the media that they had a flying disc.
Well, maybe the information came from the intelligence officer who screwed up. Listen, once again,
Blanchard saw the evidence. He held it in his hand.
but he didn't know what he was holding.
But if he was holding something that was highly unusual, something he had never seen before.
Well, that doesn't mean that just because Blanchard didn't know what it was, that it was from out of this world.
But it's strange that he would say that it was.
Hey.
Oh, well, excuse me. He didn't say that it was. He said they'd recovered a flying disc.
Right. Now, we also know for a fact that after World War II, a number of German scientists were brought over to the United States. And we also know for a fact that the Germans were working on aircraft that looked like flying saucers. Is it possible that in the testing area of New Mexico, that this research was being continued?
You touch on a point that's really something that gets under my skin as far as how advanced the Germans were and what the Germans were doing. There's no question that they were experimenting with some highly advanced
Technology.
aircraft and
Yeah.
material,
Okay.
but so were we. We
Well,
developed the atomic bomb.
but we didn't develop the rockets that took man to the moon. If it wasn't for
well,
von Braun, the Americans would not have beat the Russians to the moon. In fact, the Russians beat the Americans to the moon. They just put the first man on the moon, the Americans. You know, so.
Certainly von Braun needs a great deal of accolade.
Well, what about
for
Einstein?
What he did.
What about Einstein?
We also had our own good scientists.
Einstein
As
wasn't
a matter of fact.
Oh, wait a second. Hold on here. Albert Einstein wasn't a born American. And yet he was the one who came up with the formula for fusion.
Well, I can't argue with you on that, but I think that we had some awfully fine scientists ourselves.
Okay, so
the British did. The British had a better jet engine than the Germans did. The Germans just put it into operation, and the British, I won't say too dumb, but they had the Whittle jet engine was a far better engine than the Germans had developed.
You know, there's an old saying that the man who invented the paperclip made a little bit of money. The man who decided to put those little ridges in the paperclip made millions.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying, listen, I don't want to bring politics into this. I'm just saying that the people in Roswell were not totally in the know of what the other divisions of the United States Air Force, Army, Marines, and Navy were up to. We know that everything is compartmentalized when it comes to government projects.
Right.
So I believe that whatever did happen in Roswell, something did happen there. I won't deny that. But when it comes to the theory that it was a flying saucer from another planet with 3 little aliens, I have a problem with that because there is no evidence. There's circumstantial evidence, but all that circumstantial evidence went out the window the second that Jesse Marcel deviated from driving from the Brazil farm to the base, because as soon as he went to his house, took the evidence from his vehicle, of an official U.S. vehicle, into the house and let his son and wife touch it or even see it, that case is over. Jesse Marcel killed the Roswell case.
Well, I will acknowledge that you certainly have your own opinion, but I think that these were different times. I think that these were, and what may have been done in 1947 certainly would not be done now. But I think that they were different times, and personally, I could see the man doing that.
Well, the man should not have been an Army intelligence officer if he was going to do that. They had the wrong man at the wrong place at the wrong time. We'll be back at the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Larry Holcombe is our special guest this hour, X Zone Nation, www.larryholcombe.com. Larry, we were talking about the Roswell case and how it was handled. And you said before we went to the commercial break, there were different times. Things were done differently. And yet, the same laws that were in the 1930s when it came to how, or the 40s when the FBI went after Al Capone, are still on the books today. the case was built on evidence because of the laws that were in place. So I will agree with you that that it was after World War II, things may have been, but once again, I cannot go along with anyone being in any profession, especially military, especially intelligence, especially law enforcement, who decides, well, it's just after World War II. This could be a crashed UFO. It could be a, crashed enemy aircraft. I'm going to bring it home and show my wife and kids because I really think that this is substantial. I can't buy that.
Well, it's, I say again, it was a different time, and I think that they looked at things differently. And when you had Blanchard that handled the stuff, Blanchard let Walter Hart put out a press release. And keep in mind, and I shouldn't say keep in mind, I'm sure you know this, the 509th group, bomb group, had the pick of the litter.
Sure.
This was the best of the best.
Right.
And so how could Marcel be the chief intelligence officer?
He wasn't part of the he wasn't part of the 509th bomb squadron.
What do you mean he wasn't part of 509?
He was a base intelligence officer. The base intelligence officer, which equates to a high ranking in today's world, looking back at the old way. He would be what? Military police intelligence. Because the war was over, right? 1947, The war was over.
Right.
Could it, this is how I think it might have happened. Marcel gets the stuff, goes to his house, lets his wife and kid play with it for a while, has a cup of tea or a sandwich or whatever he did there, gets to the base and says, hey, guys, guess what I think? I think we've got a crashed flying saucer here. Whoa, hey, wait a minute, 509th Bomber Squadron, bunch of great guys, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, atom bomb. Wow, let's add this to our collection and to our trophies. All right, issue a press release. It's a UFO that crashed.
Blanchard issued the press
I understand that, but it could have been based on the information coming from the base intelligence officer.
But Blanchard held the material. He saw the material himself. And let me go back. You say that Marcel was not part of the 509th Bomb Group. I challenge that. I can't. You brought up something I've never heard before, and I can't give you documentation right now, but I will find it because I have a personal friend that was very close to Jesse Marcel Jr., Walter Hart, and Glenn Dennis.
Yeah.
For 20 years.
All right. Okay, maybe I'm wrong about his position, but big deal. That has nothing to do with anything when it comes to the alleged retrieval of a crashed UFO. Everybody skips over the details when it comes to this case because everybody wants to believe. That's why there's no physical evidence. Because everybody is so willing to take what is circumstantial evidence, and they're saying, well, you know what? Based on the circumstantial evidence we have, this case could be, won in a court of law, which is a bunch of bunk because it couldn't. But that's another story for another show. They don't look for the physical evidence because the physical evidence has never turned up since 1947. Not in.
No, you're right. It hasn't turned up.
There has not.
But it exists.
How do
I
you
believe it sincerely exists.
You believe based on circumstantial evidence and alleged witness accounts. But you yourself, sir, have never seen it. Neither has anyone else who has ever written a book or goes out on a speaking tour or appears on any of these reality TV shows where it comes to Roswell. It's all speculation.
Well, there are a lot of people in prison that have been convicted on circumstantial evidence.
But we're not talking about a crime here, sir. We're talking about an alleged UFO crash. We're saying, you know what? The government of America has lied to us. That's what you're saying. Wait, anybody?
Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe that. that the government is suppressing any information on Roswell unless it's for a matter of national security, which, in my opinion, goes towards some experimental aircraft or something experimental that they were working on. I don't believe in the UFO hypothesis. I really don't, because there is no evidence.
Well, you've got a lot of people on your side, that's for sure. And let me say this, Rob.
Sure.
I'm a skeptic. You may not believe it, but I'm a skeptic of a great many of the stories that are told by many people. I have a hard time accepting individual sightings, for instance, of UFOs without any backup, without any radar backup, without any several forms of backup.
Right.
But there are some sightings that I think that are completely unexplainable, and those are the ones that that draw my attention, and I feel comfortable with.
You know what? I agree with you. There are maybe that 1% of truly UFOs or unidentified flying objects. Just because they're unidentified doesn't mean that they are from another planet, another dimension, another galaxy, another part of space. It means that the person seeing it cannot identify it. And you mentioned something very interesting a few seconds ago about radar tracks. Were there any radar tracks of a crash or a UFO entering the restricted airspace at Roswell, the day of the Roswell crash?
The radar was really in its infancy as far as what they were trying to do. There were three very powerful radar establishments in the New Mexico area, to protect Sandia Labs, White Sands, and Los Alamos Labs.
White Sands wasn't very far from Roswell, was it?
Probably a couple of 100 miles.
Okay, but what about the civilian radar tracking systems throughout the rest of the state's air traffic control zones? Was there any radar tracking that correlated with
not in 1947.
You mean commercial aircraft radar wasn't used?
You, to my knowledge, and I stand corrected on this, but radar was so new, such a military instrument,
right?
That there was no civilian radar tracking of airliners per se at that time.
Let me ask you this, Larry. Here you've got the Roswell Air Force Base with the 509th Squadron, the nuclear squadron. Would it not make sense that after the attack on Pearl Harbor that the United States government would have done everything in their power to secure the Roswell site? Well, wouldn't one of the first things that, wait a second. Would they have not put a radar installation there? They used it in Hawaii. Why wouldn't they put it in Roswell?
Those radars were very infantile. They were very unsophisticated. We were developing very high, sophisticated new radar systems.
Okay.
One was at Moriarty. One was at Continental Divide, and one was near Roswell, which created a triangle around White Sands, Sandia, and Los Alamos. These installations were self-contained installations that had their own barracks, their own mess hall, and a very powerful generating station that was generating a tremendous amount of power for these radar installations. And this was before DuLine.
Okay,
You say,
okay. Once again, would these radar units, why wouldn't these radar units not have picked up anything that was over the Roswell airspace then if these radar systems were so powerful?
oh, I think they did.
But yet nobody's brought that up in a book. Nobody from any,
Sure, sure.
why not?
I mean,
That
there's been
that could have been
many
looked
of
at.
people that have testified that these objects were tracked by radar all the time.
I'm talking about the alleged UFO crash in Roswell. I'm not talking about any other case right now. Because up until, it seems that Roswell is the mecca of ufology. And it's, like I still can't understand why they have Roswell days, why they turn it into a circus, but I understand the town and the city makes a lot of money. Listen, you and I've got to take our final break. Please stand by. X-Zone Nation will return on the other side as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone with Larry Holcombe. Don't go away. And welcome back. Larry Holcombe is our guest of this hour, www.larryholcombe.com. All right, let's get away from Roswell because, I'm sure you're tired about talking about it. I know I am.
That's fine with me.
All right. Do you yourself believe in ET visitation? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think there's enough evidence to indicate that there probably is extraterrestrial visitation here, and probably has been for some years, maybe even going back to biblical times. But I don't get into that. I'm strictly from the 1940s forward, and my main thrust is what I call flying saucers. I don't like the term UFOs, never have. It's too all-encompassing. And so I guess you would say that my research is in nuts and bolts flying saucers. I'm not even that interested in extraterrestrial beings, but I'm a nuts and bolts flying saucer guy.
And what kind of nuts and bolt flying saucers do you write about?
Well, have you read my book?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Starting with the reported crash of a saucer in Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Yeah, that's going back to what, 1941?
41. The air raid over Los Angeles in 1942. The great Washington merry-go-round in July of 1952, the extraordinary case of Japan Airlines 16, I don't have it in front, 1682, 16.
Up in Alaska.
Yeah. These cases that can't be explained, the missiles that were attacked by some sort of object in Maelstrom Air Force Base.
Yeah.
That has been discussed at length by a friend of mine, Bob Salas,
Yeah.
who was launch control officer there. You don't become a launch control officer of a nuclear missile installation if you're a fool.
But let me ask you this: as a member of the United States Air Force, aren't these people sworn to secrecy about events that happen?
Yes, they are.
Then why did he break his oath of secrecy?
Because he read about it in a book, and I think it was Timothy Good's book. The name escapes me right offhand, but his first book he read about the Maelstrom event there. He had, I believe, an attorney contact the Air Force, not mentioning UFOs, but saying that they had an event at Maelstrom that he had been sworn to secrecy. Was it still a classified matter? He got a letter back, or the attorney or whoever it was, got a letter back from the Air Force, from the government, saying, yes, it is still classified, but we will now declassify it because of all of the years that have passed, which the letter from the Air Force relieved Salas of his obligation, and he could talk about it.
Does that seem strange to you?
No?
Wait, yeah, something, let me see if I understand these right. Something strange, weird, bizarre shuts down a nuclear missile base, and the government says, oh, it's all right to talk about it. We can release the information because it happened so long ago. That makes sense to you?
Well, that's what happened. And things are declassified all the time. Again, he never mentioned flying saucers. He just mentioned that the missiles were shut down at Maelstrom, and he got official confirmation from the government. He had signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
Bob told me for years, until he read about this and got this letter, he never even told his wife about it. He never mentioned it. But once he was cleared to discuss it, he discussed it, and he's gone public with it.
Oh, I know. I've had him on the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you not believe him?
I believe something happened, but I don't believe it had anything to do with UFOs.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I guess that that there are folks like yourself that really want hard evidence.
And don't you think that the public deserves hard evidence? You know, look what they tried to do to poor Judge Brett Kavanaugh over the last couple of weeks, and it didn't work because there was no hard evidence.
Right. You're exactly right. I couldn't agree with you more.
You know, people deserve hard evidence. They don't deserve hearsay. They don't deserve what many ufologists are spinning. They deserve the facts. And until these facts are acquired, I don't care who says what. Unless you can prove it to me, I don't believe it. I want to believe, but I also want the facts. I want the proof. When I was in the police force, we dealt with facts. We dealt with evidence. When I investigate a show, I deal with facts. I deal with evidence. This is what.
Rob, there's a great deal of trace evidence out there.
Have you seen any evidence? Have you seen evidence, sir? And if so, please share it with me.
Have I personally seen evidence?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Then why do you believe?
Well, I mean, I don't think that these people that are collecting trace evidence are lying. I haven't personally been to the site where these craft supposedly set down, and they've done soil samples, and the reports come back that are extremely strange. But no, I have not myself seen the trace evidence. But there is a great deal out there.
Allegedly.
Well, I think that could be proven.
Why hasn't it been proven then if it already exists? I think it has. It's just people don't read about it, don't accept it, or
for
don't
whatever
care.
Reason. I don't know.
Yeah. Is it possible that the UFO community is responsible for dumbing down America when it comes to UFOs?
No, I think that the United States government is responsible for dumbing down the population.
Oh, now, there's no proof of that. Once again, you're starting to sound like a Democrat at the hearings for poor Judge Kavanaugh.
In 1955, the Patil Memorial Institute did a study of 3,201 UFO cases for Project Blue Book, directed at the time by Edward Ruppelt, who was the only one with Project Blue Book that did a job that was worth a damn. And the report was not given to the public because they said it was too lengthy and too expensive for the government to print, to release to the news media and the public.
Okay, does the public really need to know? Does the public really care?
Does the public need to know?
Yeah.
That's a question that I can't answer and one that I mull over all the time. I don't know whether they need to know or not. If it's something, if this phenomenon is something that's so terrible, perhaps the public doesn't need to know. The public shouldn't know. I don't know. I think about that a great deal.
But what happens if what the government knows has nothing to do with UFOs, but everything to do with national security in countries not friendly to the United States or the democracy in general? By ufologists pushing and pushing and pushing, can you blame the government for doing whatever they can to secure the freedom and the democracy of the United States of America, as well as any other country that is friendly with them?
Why don't they release the information they have?
Why should they?
Why shouldn't they? If it's
let me see.
If it's nothing there, if it can be proved.
I'm saying that what happens if it's another country? For example, Russia had something to do with it. Do we really want Russia to know that, or let the American public know that Russia or another country, China, Japan, wherever, was caught, and that what happened at Roswell or any of these other sightings, whether it be an experimental aircraft or whatever, do we need to tell the public this?
The public, what I'm saying is that if the government has information that would not be suitable for the population in general to know, then I think that probably it should be concealed.
All right, you and I have to say so long for tonight. Thank you very much, Larry, for coming on the show. I was going to get into the show and ask him why he uses the name Larry when his real name is Irving, but I thought, what the heck, give the guy a break. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and station in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.